Hello again, and welcome to video number 3 in our series on RDA for non-catalogers. Chances are, if you're still watching this video, you're ready to move on to learn more about the finer details of how RDA is impacting on MARC records. In this video, we'll look at more descriptive fields. In particular, we'll look at a 300 field which mixes various descriptive standards, including RDA, and we'll also look at the new 264 field, which is used in some RDA records, but not all of them. So let's go ahead and look at our first record. This is the same MARC record that we looked at in the previous video. This time I put a box around a new field, the 264. Most RDA records will contain a 264 rather than a 260. The 264 breaks down descriptive information a little finer than does a 260. However, an RDA field at the current time could have either a 260 or a 264. Most users will not notice any significant difference between the two. The key difference for us is that RDA highly recommends the 264 subfield, which contains both the print date and the copyright date, if both are known. This can be helpful to many users and also sometimes for collection development purposes. The two dates are differentiated by the copyright date having the copyright symbol before it, or if the copyright symbol is not reproducible on a system, just the small letter C is used. In the case of this record, the cataloger may have either forgotten to include the copyright date or was not able to locate it. The latter sometimes happens with ebooks. I would typically expect to see a copyright date in a record such as this. A key point here is that RDA does not absolutely require that both dates be included, and this is a common theme when you're looking at RDA requirements. Let's look at a few examples from training sessions for catalogers. In the top example, we see a typical example of how we might record publisher information. Note that this slide focuses on teaching catalogers how to record just the place of publication and name of publisher, and none of the other information that we might typically find in a 264 field. Now have a look at the second example. It is incorrect under RDA simply because too many abbreviations are used. Now look at the second set of examples in the second box. Notice that the name of the publisher was transcribed completely. This is normal for RDA. The only time when the name of the publisher would be abbreviated in some way is when the publisher is best known by that abbreviated form, or there is no way for the cataloger to determine what a fuller form might be. The third box is an interesting example because we have to take in consideration that this particular training slide was intended for an American audience. Generally speaking, Americans would have picked the Houston publisher under AACR2 rules. However, RDA prefers the first mentioned publisher to be recorded, even if that publisher is in another country. So, you will also note that there are abbreviations used in this case. The reason for this is that the cataloger was not able to ascertain the full spelling of the publisher's name, so she or he precisely transcribed what is on the resource, and that does reflect what RDA asks catalogers to do. Now let's have a look at the final box. This is a resource that has no publisher and no date of publication listing. Using AACR2 rules, we would have put the letters SL to indicate that we don't know the location, and SN to indicate that we don't know the publisher. Because RDA was being used, the cataloger just put the words publisher not identified. In addition to the approach of stating that a certain piece of information was not supplied, RDA encourages catalogers, but doesn't require them, to give a probable publisher or place of publication when it is reasonable to make a guess. One last bit of information about 264 fields on this screen is that RDA makes it completely acceptable for there to be more than one 264 field if the publisher for a particular resource has changed, or if more than one company is responsible for making the resource available, and therefore including more than one 264 fields makes sense. As a result, it is very common for there to be multiple 264 fields in serial records in particular. Let's have a look at this 264 field from a serial record. We can see from the source that two different companies have had a hand in making the resource available. So a 264 field is created for each company. The information in square brackets in the 264 actually indicates where the cataloger has given probable information or where the information could not be determined. Notice that in the training there is a differentiation between RDA, which will permit the cataloger to say that a place of publication is not known, and the idea that the Library of Congress requires that a cataloger make an educated guess as to the probable publication. Libraries can set standards locally a lot of times that RDA does not require. Note that there is a question mark behind the probable location, and this gives you an idea that the cataloger was making an educated guess. The key in looking at all of these variations is to demonstrate that RDA used on its own or in combination with other standards or local practices can mean that what is recorded in a 264 field is not as standardized as it was once under AACR 2. Since we function in a copy cataloging environment and the majority of our records are created by other libraries or by vendors who copy records from other libraries, we currently see a diversity of styles, and this will likely continue. The important principle in this field now is clarity rather than standardization. As long as the meaning of the information is clear, we can consider the metadata to be acceptable. The key is, too, that these are display fields, not fields that we use for searching. Now let's move along and look at another field. If you recall, in a previous video, we looked at an ebook record that had a provider neutral description in a 300 field. Rather than give the number of pages in the book, for example, all that record said was that it was for an online resource. Looking at this example, we can see that it is different. The 300 field has the provider neutral description, but the catalogers decided to enrich the description by indicating the number of pages, as well as the fact that the ebook is illustrated and that some of those illustrations are in color. While this description does not jive with the vendor neutral guidelines, it is the type of description that is both recommended and preferred under RDA. However, with RDA's more flexible guidelines, a cataloger or a library who decides, for some reason, that they only wish to describe a resource at its most basic level, that description is still considered acceptable. For those libraries who, for example, wish to put links from various vendors for the same ebook title on the same record, they may wish to use only the provider neutral description, and that is completely valid. Other libraries may simplify the description in order to speed up the cataloging process. RDA will actually allow all of these, so we can get a lot of variation of what we see in this field. This is the end of video 3.